Hello, I'm Jean-Philippe, host of the Positive Leadership Podcast. Today's guest holds a very special place for me because, like myself, he has spent a significant part of his career in a wonderful company, which we continue to love, Microsoft, and where he made an incredible impact. And more importantly, he's been one of my legendary managers and personal mentors. From joining Microsoft in 1981 as one of his early employees, to taking on major leadership roles, including president of the business division. He's left an indelible mark on the company forever. In addition to Microsoft achievements, he is well known for his philanthropic efforts. He became the CEO of the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation in 2008. And alongside his wife, Tricia, they co-founded the wonderful Raikes Foundation, which focuses on youth development, education, addressing youth homelessness. I'm thrilled to welcome my friend, Jeff Raikes from Nebraska. Jeff, I'm so excited to have you joining my podcast today.
Great. Thank you, Jean-Philippe. It's quite an honor to be on your podcast.
You're so kind. So, Jeff, to begin our conversation, I always love to explore my guest's childhood and family background, which seems to have significantly shaped your core values and work ethic. So you grew up in a small farming community in Nebraska. I think actually you're recording from Nebraska, so you're going to tell us more from that endpoint. So can you share with us what it was like growing up in this environment and what lessons and main values you learned from your parents and your siblings there?
Great. Well, again, Jean-Philippe, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. You were a great leader for me to work with at Microsoft. And the fact that you're doing this podcast, I think, is fantastic. People are going to learn a lot from you. Just to give you a little context on your first question, I grew up on a farm about 7 miles from a small rural community, less than 2,000 population. And my family had been farming in Nebraska since 1854. So we have a long history of being involved in agriculture. And that was hugely important to shaping my opportunity to grow up and reach my potential. And I would say that the most important thing was the focus on values. When you grow up on a farm, you learn very early on work ethic. Farming is kind of a 6.5 day a week job. Everybody's involved. I learned to drive a tractor when I was 7 years old. I started working in the fields when I was 9 years old. And so work ethic is very important. But another thing where I really, really was fortunate, Warren Buffett likes to say some people are winners in the ovarian lottery. I was born to parents who were first generation college graduates. And I was the fifth of 5 siblings where all of my siblings got college degrees. In fact, many of them got graduate degrees. And so the emphasis on education was very important in our family. And that's what opened up my eyes to the world and the opportunity. And the third thing I'll mention in terms of values is the value of community. When you grow up in a small town like that, we're kind of all needing to look out for each other, to help each other.
Take care of each other.
And sometimes I think in large cities, you actually have a narrower network than you do in a small community like that. And so those principles of how you give back to the community, how you support your neighbors, those are all very important values for me as I grew up.
Oh, wonderful. Any particular memories, maybe one from, I don't know, a dinner or maybe a fun activity with your dad, parents, or siblings, Jeff, you'd like to share with us just to symbolize as a testimonial to those values and work ethics as an example, as a story?
I'll give one that relates to philanthropy. I was about 10, 12 years old when there was a blizzard, a snowstorm in eastern Nebraska. And a couple from one of the big cities, Lincoln or Omaha, not big by Paris standards, but big by our standards, they got stuck in a snowdrift near our farm. And they came to our house and knocked on the door and asked for help. And so my dad immediately offered to help them get their car out of the snowdrift. And he immediately offered me to go get the tractor and the chain. and it was
Yes.
probably about, 5 below zero. I mean, it was
Yeah.
it was
It
was
was really
cold.
cold.
And, we went and we got their, pulled their car out of the snowdrift and got them going on the road.
Hmm.
And the couple, very nice couple, said, here, we'd like to give you some money for
Hmm.
helping us. And I'll always remember this, Jean-Philippe. My father said, I don't want to take any of your money. I
Hmm.
just want you to pay it back to
Someone
somebody
else.
else
Yeah.
in the future, or pay it
Wonderful.
forward if you want to use that phrase. And
Yeah.
so, I still can remember where I was standing. I saw my father tell them
Yeah.
that. I might have liked a few bucks, but my father emphasized how important it was for each of us to pay it forward in life. And
Yeah.
he basically, he went on to say he just hoped that if any of his kids
Hmm.
were ever in need, that somebody would step up to help them. And that was a
Yeah.
very important lesson for a 10-year-old.
For sure, wonderful lesson early in age, and then fast forward, and we may come back later on. Actually, early in age as well, Jeff. In the late 70s, by the way, just like me, actually, in my early 80s, just a few years after you, following your
Mm-hmm.
path, I think both of us got in love with this amazing device called the Apple II, and your life took another direction. So, how come in the middle of your farm in Nebraska? You developed an early interest in technology and computers. Where did that come from?
Well, it began with my family. My
Hmm.
father was a very successful farmer. Really, actually, you'd say he was a very successful agribusiness person.
Hmm.
And part of it was his willingness to be an early adopter of technology. In the 1930s, he was one of the first to identify the potential of hybrid seed corn. So
Hmm.
we started growing hybrid seed corn. He created that as a business. He
Yeah.
adopted technologies in how to do livestock
Yeah.
feeding and management. And in addition, my father also was very innovative in terms of business as well.
Hmm.
He created a farm business management association where we could compare the benchmarks of our farm to other farms and so on and so
Oh,
forth.
so I understand where your benchmarking talents coming from, Jeff.
Yeah, no, that's how, I got early lessons in that, Jean-Philippe. And my brother got a PhD in agricultural
Hmm.
economics from University of California, Davis,
Yep. Yep.
and was a professor of agricultural economics there and at Iowa State University. And that was my first exposure to a computer. In probably 1968 or 1970,
Yep.
I went to UC Davis as a
Ah.
12-year-old, and I saw this amazing computer that my brother was working with. And
Huh.
so that was very intriguing to me. And then when I was at Stanford University, I learned computer programming,
Hmm.
and I thought, well, if I program an Apple II computer, I can help my brother run our farm.
So when you back to your career, Jeff, it's impossible not to admire the journey you've taken from your small town upbringing, which clearly instilled again you a strong work ethic. You just talked about sense of community belonging as well, to your rise as a leadership figure both in the tech industry and philanthropy. And did you have actually a clear idea about that career path early on? And as someone with such a diverse and impactful career, did you find it challenging to choose your field of study?
Well, Jean-Philippe, in high school, I thought I'd be a golf professional.
Wow. Okay.
You probably grew up thinking you would be a football star, a soccer
Exactly
star.
right. Actually,
You know,
soccer had the same dream. Yes.
so
Yeah.
I did not have a clear sense of what my
Yeah.
career would be, but I thought it would be involved in agriculture as I was going off to college. I thought maybe
Yep.
I would, do something. Maybe it would be with the United States Department of Agriculture or something like that, and then join
Hmm.
my brother in running our farm.
Hmm.
And my my father thought it was more important for me to get a business degree instead of an
Hmm.
agricultural degree.
Yes.
And he had read that Stanford had the best business school. And
Ah.
so he thought I should go to Stanford. I knew nothing about Stanford, but I visited over the Christmas break of my senior year in high school. And
Yeah.
as I drove down Palm Drive,
Hmm.
and if you've ever been to Stanford's campus, it's one of the most beautiful campuses in the
Hmm.
world. is I drove down Palm Drive
Yeah.
approaching the main quad of campus. It was 72 degrees and it was 12 below zero in Nebraska. And I decided I'd like to go here. So even though I didn't know anything about them,
Yeah.
I thought, hey, this is a great place to go. And then, of course, I'm super lucky that I even got accepted into Stanford. And I get there and I find out there's no undergraduate business school.
So what did you decide to do?
Well, I thought I was pretty good at math and science, so
Yes.
I went to a orientation picnic for engineering, and I met two professors who were quite tall and identical twin brothers, and they had grown up on a hog farm in Missouri.
Oh.
And one of them, so they were my people, okay?
Of course, your
and
peers,
one of them was the chair of the Department of Engineering Economic Systems,
Yeah.
and he sort of heard my lament that there was no undergraduate business school, and he said, "Don't worry, we'll create a degree in engineering economic systems, and that'll prepare you to go work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and so on and so forth." But it's a principle that I learned from my father.
Yes.
And, my father was actually trained as a chemical engineer and was working in California when the Depression shut down the Standard Oil of California at El Segundo.
Yep.
So he was on his way to MIT, and my grandfather was losing our farm. And my dad stayed and literally and figuratively saved the family farm. And so the thing I learned from my father in many ways is it's good to have a plan, but be open to opportunity. And this seemed like one of those examples.
A wonderful story, Jeff. And was actually the plan of your dad that Jeff was going to run the farm for the family?
No, I don't think so. I think, though, he had hoped that both my brother and I would do it together.
Would do it together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And my brother at the time was a professor at Iowa State. Yep. And so it wasn't 100% clear that my brother would come back to the family farm, but it was clear to me my brother would only come back to the family farm when my dad retired. he was going to be his own leader of the farm. So
I understand.
He did that.
So again, talk about the studies that you had in Stanford. Fascinating to see again how you combine engineering and economics as well. I guess the business field came together. So you're already positioned at the intersection again of technology and innovation, which will eventually become central to your life and your career. To what extent do you think this interdisciplinary focus shaped your future path in any ways or not? Did it help you navigate again the evolving landscape of technology and later on philanthropy as well in your life?
Well, I think it was very influential. I will say that some of the things I learned, like how to calculate the eigenvalue of a matrix in order to determine a future fish population, I didn't really apply that in my career. But on the other hand, the discipline of that thinking of how to apply mathematical approaches to, to really gauge, various alternatives, expected value, risk management. Those were very important, and they did shape my approach. So that focus on systems thinking and on problem solving was very important in my career, even if I didn't calculate a lot of eigenvalues.
So, Jeff, after graduating from Stanford, you decided to leave Nebraska and joined a freshly born startup in Cupertino, Apple. At the time, there were less, I think, than 1,000 employees working for Steve Jobs at Apple. I understand that your first job there, you were actually tasked to launch and promote the very first spreadsheet of the microcomputer industry, VisiCalc. Funny enough, as I started my very first job back in 1982 in a French software startup, I was asked to build a budget on VisiCalc, Jeff. That's kind of funny.
That's good. It shows your early leadership in technology.
Of course. So can you share with us what it looked like working for Steve Jobs? And how did this experience lead you at some point to Microsoft? We'll talk about the Microsoft interviews process as well, which I think was kind of fun and interesting.
Yeah, it was definitely a trip. Well, again, I was graduating in 1980, June of
Yep.
1980, and thinking that I would probably go to the U.S. Department of Agriculture after I got a graduate degree in
Mm-hmm.
engineering economic systems. But I'd never done any job interviews because I'd
Mm,
always worked on our family farm.
of
And
course.
so I thought, well, this company called Apple has come to campus. I should go ahead and interview with them because I've been working on their computer.
Yeah.
And because engineering economic systems is a lot about mathematical modeling, they
Mm-hmm.
thought my academic work would apply to spreadsheet
Yes.
work. And so, like you, my first job in the industry at Apple Computer was building VisiCalc models, and those were add-ons to VisiCalc for the Apple III.
Yes.
Really an advanced computer system. And so, again, I think this is an example of having a plan but being open to opportunity.
Yeah.
I thought, well, maybe I'll take a break from
Mm.
Stanford and try out this company and see what it's like. And
Yeah.
what I learned was at Apple was I
Mm.
learned I love software. I mean, the
Yeah.
idea that you could use software to shape the way in which we do information work. Somebody would challenge me with a VisiCalc model. They'd say, well, you
Yep.
probably can't do a PERT sheet, project
Mm.
management sheet in
Yep.
VisiCalc.
Yep.
And so then I'd spend all
You
night,
build it.
building it. You come back in the morning and
Mm.
you demo that to them and their
Ah,
eyes light up.
it's
And
powerful.
that for me was addictive. The
Yeah.
idea that software could do these things for people in information work. So the number one thing I learned
Mm.
at Apple
Yeah.
Computer was that I learned that I love software.
Software.
And the second thing I learned is hardware companies, certainly at that point in time, were more about using software to sell their machine as opposed to
Right.
focused on
Yes.
software. And then the third thing I learned at Apple,
Mm.
which we can talk about later if you want,
Yeah. Yeah.
stock options.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. I think you'll come back to that maybe at some point with Microsoft. But any particular?
And I just want to clarify,
Yeah. Okay.
Steve Jobs was not running the company. He was actually,
not.
he had been pushed aside.
At the
he
time,
was,
he was pushed aside.
yeah,
Exactly.
he had
Yeah.
not,
Okay.
there was a gentleman, Mike, I'm trying to remember, Mike was the president, and then,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and then
But
another
Steve
guy,
Wozniak Steve Wozniak was not around anymore already.
Oh, Steve was there. Steve Wozniak was still there. Yeah. And so, the president of the company got pushed out shortly after the public offering, and the venture capitalists took over.
All right.
And then they finally hired John Scully, but that was already after I'd been to. But there is a Steve Jobs connection here, and that is Steve wanted me to work on the Macintosh. I would have been about the sixth person on the Macintosh. And, I didn't actually admire Steve's leadership approach. Plus, in addition, I'd learned what I shared with you. I learned that I love software.
Yes.
And so the idea of being able to pursue software was really what drove me. I mean, it kind of came down, look at it this way, it came down to, do I want to work on the Mac or do I want to build Office?
Yes. But I mean, the Macintosh project was a very special, cool project too, right? So I'm sure it must have been a pretty big dilemma. So tell us more about this dilemma when one day you flew over from Cupertino to Seattle to Bellevue, I guess at the time, maybe.
Yep.
And you met with Steve Ballmer, and Bill Gates. Tell us more about the discussion you had, and how did they convince you, if they did in the first time, to join the company, which was much smaller than Apple at the time, by the way.
Oh yeah, yeah. When Steve Ballmer had heard about my ability with VisiCalc, and Microsoft was starting to develop a spreadsheet called Multiplan. Yeah. Or at that time, electronic paper was the code name, and I wasn't really interested in Microsoft. But my sister lived in Seattle. And so if I interviewed, I got a free trip to see my sister. And I told them, well, I can only come on the weekend. I'm really working hard at Apple, which was true. I was working around the clock on a thing called the Apple III word processor. Yes. And so they accommodated me. I came up in August. And Jean-Philippe, Seattle in August is absolutely one of the most beautiful places to be in the world. Yeah.
It is.
And then when I'm walking, I'm in Microsoft's offices on a Saturday morning, and I'm walking down the hallway with Steve Ballmer, and Steve says, Jeff, that room over there, it's locked. I can't tell you what's in that room, but it's very exciting. And so, I meet with 2 or 3 other, I guess it was 3 other executives. And then we walk back by and he says, yeah, that room, it's still locked. Well, I know what Steve is doing. He's telling me that they have the IBM personal computer, which had not been announced yet.
Yes.
And so, that was, and then I met with Bill, and it was kind of a fun interview, but honestly, it was mostly Bill trying to get competitive insight on Apple Computer.
As usual.
Which I admire. He you got to follow your competition. And so, here I am. And the other thing, Jean-Philippe, walking down the hallway is there were computers from dozens of companies.
Yes.
I mean, they were just stacked in the hallways. and I love software, so I'm thinking, I don't know who's going to win in hardware. But these Microsoft guys are doing software for everybody.
Every machine.
So that weekend in, August of 1981 was a pivotal moment in my life. I thought Seattle was beautiful. Housing was more affordable. Microsoft was all about software. A little crazy, but it was good.
So tell us more about the work environment you found at Microsoft at the time, the kind of culture we had at the time, because I joined the company little after, but in a subsidiary, which is always very different headquarters. How was it?
Yeah. Well, actually, let me just say one other thing, if I may, about Steve Jobs.
Yes, please.
So I interviewed in August, but I didn't want to leave until I vested on my first stock options at Apple. So I didn't announce that I was leaving until November 1st. November 1st or 2nd. And about 2:00 in the afternoon, I get a phone call. And it's Steve Jobs on the line.
Okay.
And he's swearing at me, what the F are you doing? Blah, 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 And, look, I'm 23 years old. I'm not, it's not like I'm the most important person in the world. And, he's just, saying, and then in the most eloquent way, which we used to call the Steve Jobs reality distortion field, he launches into a description of how Microsoft is going to go out of business. Because he wants me to work on the Mac, and I'm saying, well, I want to go to, want to go to Microsoft to work on software and so on and so forth. Microsoft's going to go out of business. And I listened to him, and then I said, Steve, you might be right, but in my case, the downside is I end up on our farm in Nebraska, and that's actually just okay with me. And then I hung up.
You hung up. Wow.
Oh yeah. I was not a Steve fan. I'm sorry. His style was not appealing to me. But I get to Microsoft November 13th, 1981. There's 100 employees. There were some things that were a very natural fit. Just the enthusiasm about software. We had this company meeting, and Charles Simoni did the explanation of the Simoni revenue bomb for how in applications we were going to leverage code between computers and between applications, and the revenue was just going to explode. And Kei Nishi, who was from our subsidiary in Japan, Casey, Kei says, well, the telephone is an extension of your voice, and the television is an extension of your eyes, but the computer is an extension of your brain.
Wow.
So it was really fun. I mean, and you know, I would say I had to learn to work with Bill. You know,
Yeah.
Bill had an intensity
Mm.
that was a little different than the
Yeah.
style I had, but I had to learn to work with Bill,
Yeah.
and for the most part, I would say, um, you know, there were a few rough months there. Steve Ballmer gave me a little coaching, but I guess you'd say it all turned out okay.
It turned very much okay, indeed. Yes. So, in my case, Jeff, as you may remember, I joined Microsoft France back in May 1984. This is the year actually when the Mac was launched with Microsoft Word and Multiplan, and when Microsoft shipped as well MS-DOS 3.0. I recall that incredibly exciting moment when Multiplan was still actually a number one spreadsheet in my home country in France, contrary to the rest of the world. We are very proud of that. And at the time, it felt like working for a real startup, and I enjoyed so much the vibrancy and the entrepreneurship spirit, creativity of our culture back then. What about you, Jeff, in your memories in terms again of the culture between our engineers like Charles Simoni and many incredible engineers, Bill himself, Steve running a different set of jobs, building a global business and finding a new business model with OEMs and so on and so forth. Stop there. What was the culture?
Yeah, I think you would say the culture of Microsoft when you were joining, very similar to when I joined. It was one of real passion or enthusiasm for what we were doing. If you remember at that time, we had this branding statement. You know, a computer on every desk and in every home.
Oh yeah,
And I think the greatest thing in humanity is when you can feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. And
right.
so the idea that we had this opportunity to shape the world of computing. I mean, if you had told me in 1981 when I was starting, or 84 when you were starting, that there
Yep.
were going to be a billion users of Microsoft Office,
Yes.
I would wonder what kind of cocaine you were, I mean, that was just like, wow. But, we were part of something bigger than ourselves. And when I
Yeah.
joined Microsoft in 1981, people felt like there may never be $100 million software company.
Right.
They thought Bill in particular thought, yeah, the hardware companies may come in and just bundle software and wipe out the independent software
Yeah.
business.
Give it away. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we also felt this urgency
Hmm.
to move and make things happen. So we had the enthusiasm, we had the sense of urgency. You
Speed.
know,
Yeah.
we were
Mm.
competitive. You
Yeah.
know,
Very
Jay
competitive.
Blumenthal, he studied every spreadsheet out there to understand how to make sure Microsoft Excel was the
Yeah.
best spreadsheet. So that sense of
Yeah.
enthusiasm, competitiveness, passion for what we were doing. Those are all great attributes of the culture. And I hope you felt the same in France.
I did actually, Jeff, and I found again such an incredible, not just teamwork, but entrepreneurship across the team. As you may recall, at the time we were even building and shipping our own products from the countries, so that was very particular. So you started Microsoft as a product manager, Jeff, and quickly became involved also with development teams, engineering teams, and obviously, notably, you played a leading role in shaping Microsoft application strategy, which I think at the time was called multi-tools. Remember some of those
Yeah.
packages, multi-tools.
Yes.
And you are, I must tell our listeners, the founder, I think, of the most, or one of the most certainly incredible and unparalleled business franchise in the world called Microsoft Office. You just talked about 1 billion people. He started from scratch. And this has been a foundation, just to give you some recent numbers, of Microsoft growth with what we call today Microsoft Productivity and Business Processes business, which generated last fiscal year $87 billion of revenue for the company. So this is pretty mind blowing. So
Yeah.
tell us about this amazing story and what it took from a business and leadership perspective to bring that to life, that concept of Office, which seems trivial today, and make it thrive for more than for decades, and I'm sure for many more decades to come.
Well, it was certainly not easy. As you well know, when you started, we were way behind in applications.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the market was dominated by Lotus 123, WordPerfect, Ashton Tate DBase, Harvard Graphics. We might not even been like Avis. We might not have been number 2 trying harder.
Right.
Well, we were probably much. Well, we were behind. Let me just say it that way.
Yeah.
And we learned part of our strategy with Multiplan was to be able to do a spreadsheet that could run on any computer. And when Lotus 123 shipped, and I remember the day, January 20th, 1983, I figured out we had the wrong strategy. People don't care about having a spreadsheet that can run on any computer. They want the best spreadsheet on their computer. And that was Lotus 123. And Lotus 123 really differentiated the IBM PC. The IBM PC had larger memory, it had higher resolution graphics, and had a faster processing speed. Lotus 123 had faster recalculation, bigger spreadsheet models, and built-in business graphics. And so that synergy between the hardware platform and the software platform really, really stuck in my mind. And so February 1st, not even like 10 days later, we started the PC Word 1.0 project. And we shipped a word processor in October of 1983 that really exploited the architecture of the IBM PC. It didn't run on all the computers, but it ran really well there. But even so, we started out behind. And so in October of 83, we had a retreat to conceive a new spreadsheet product, a successor to Multiplan. And it was designed to run on PC, MS-DOS, and be a better spreadsheet than Lotus 123. And just as you were starting, the Apple Macintosh was introduced. And in the spring of 1984, I went to Bill and I said, look, I think our best bet is to bet on graphic user interface. I think trying to battle Lotus 123 with this spreadsheet on
it's not going to work.
It's not going to do well. And so, Bill agreed, and we pivoted. It made some of the developers, in particular, the best developer on the program was Doug Klunder. He was very unhappy about the decision, but he went along with it. And we introduced Excel on the Macintosh rather than first on the PC. And so that was the beginning of us turning the tide.
Yes.
And you've heard this from me before. It's important to bet on a technology paradigm shift, because in a technology paradigm shift, you can gain more market share more rapidly as opposed to exactly. And then later on, and of course this was always my dream when I came from Apple to Microsoft, was to build a suite of products, a suite of Office products. And so then by the late 1980s, we started to have that suite of products. And I went to John Shirley, who was our president, fabulous leader, great mentor to me. And I said, John, why don't we take 3 of these apps and put them into a single box for the price of 2? and John said, let's do it. And that was the beginning of Microsoft Office. And that is a business model transformation. Everything was sold separately then, and we transformed it so that it was a single productivity suite as opposed to a set of separate applications, a single licensing approach, which appealed to the corporate customers. And so that combination of a technology paradigm shift, and graphic user interface, plus the Office product suite business model transformed our fortune. And as you say, it's one heck of a big fortune today.
That's done, Jeff. It's wonderful to hear the story from the founder of Microsoft Office, and it's just an amazing story. Now, I'd like to shift gears and talk about your leadership journey. I must confess to my listeners that I'm a big fan of you as a leader, and I had the incredible opportunity to work for you back in July 1998. It was actually, I remember vividly, it was right after France won its first soccer World Cup in Paris. It was a big time, big day. Allez les Bleus. And then right after, I moved my wife and my 3 kids to Redmond. And I landed there as a customer vice president for customer marketing. What the heck was that? I was coming from the field with my French accent, of course, with zero knowledge of how a big American tech company headquarters was operating. And I was candid, avid to learn, and also humbled by the opportunity. But what helped me the most back then was Jeff, warm and humanistic leadership approach. You were so empowering, bring a lot of confidence, caring for your people, of course, including myself, coming from the field, and our customers feel the same. And you've been always striving for the highest standards of execution, Jeff, but also the highest standards in terms of people ethics, I would say. So in many ways, you exhibited what I've learned to call positive leadership some 15 years after. So can you share with us the way you build that positive leadership philosophy, and how would you characterize what a positive leader is in your own words?
Well, first of all, let me say that move in 1998, I was the lucky one of the two of us. As you proved throughout your career, you were an amazing, you've been an amazing leader. You're an amazing leader for Microsoft. And that was part of what I benefited in shaping my own leadership style, is observing other strong leaders and understanding what their attributes were, and also when their leadership attributes aligned with my values. So it kind of goes back to what we talked about early.
Yep.
I think when a leader can create an environment where people feel empowered and motivated to bring their best selves to work, that's when you're going to get the collective genius. That's where you're going to get the best. And you brought deep success from your experience in the field to our corporate headquarters. And of course, everybody knows the old joke about, the problem with corporate headquarters. They go out to the subsidiaries that say, "Hey, I'm from corporate. I'm here to help you." And the subsidiaries say, well, maybe not so much. But, when you can bring deep experience like you had into corporate headquarters, that could make our corporate headquarters a more supportive function for the rest of the world. I mean, we really had to have the headquarters thinking that they were not the center of the universe, that actually the people who are closest to our customers are the ones where it's most important, and having a way of getting that feedback from customers into our product life cycle, that's important. So, it's about creating that environment of collective genius. And if I may, Jean-Philippe, I'm going to point to a book that I hope your readers or your audience will consider reading. And it's by a professor named Mary Murphy. And it's called Cultures of Growth. And we may talk about this later, but she's was a graduate student for Carol Dweck, who did the early work on mindsets and individuals. What Mary did is she took that work and turned it into understanding corporate cultures and organization cultures. And there are 5 key elements of creating a culture of growth: collaboration, innovation and creativity, risk-taking and resilience, integrity and ethical behavior, and DEI. And those 5 I think are very important. And I wish I'd had the book when I was leading. But I will say that somewhat naturally, I think I did a pretty good job on a number of those elements. And I think it's great that authors and researchers like Mary can take the benefit of their research and share it with your listeners, so that they can have a more defined framework for how to create that kind of environment.
No, it's a wonderful reference, Jeff. So much that I actually had Mary Murphy as a guest on that podcast, and
Excellent.
so I will refer my listeners to that episode. Thank you for bringing that up. It's a wonderful episode, and she talks about the way she's been, in a way, extended or expanding the work of Carol Dweck to truly understand how that growth mindset could manifest itself across an organization, small or super large, and the way you shape and build a culture to make such a large body of people to work all together toward the same goal. So I think it's a wonderful reference, which I love. But you did that not by accident, yeah.
Yeah, and the thing. Look, we have many, in my opinion, many great attributes in Microsoft culture. But I write a column for Forbes. You know that, and one of them I wrote about Mary Murphy's book, and I said that a little bit of a critique of Microsoft culture. Too often, we might be in a meeting where I witnessed a battle to see who was the smartest in the room.
Correct.
Whereas with Satya Nadella, who worked with Mary Murphy, as did you, Satya's principle is to be the most intellectually curious person in the room.
That's right.
And that begins to open up the collective genius for the organization. And so I think it's great that you spent time with Mary. I think that's a great example of your leadership.
So continuing the discussion, Jeff, early on I had the pleasure as well to host my manager and friend Satya Nadella that you just talked about, CEO and chairman of Microsoft Corporation. And with him, we talked about finding meaning in your work. Those are the words Satya has been using actually for years. And the way Microsoft employees can use their company as a platform to achieve more and eventually fulfill their potential. So in your case, would you mind sharing 2 legendary leadership lessons and stories that still inspire you today? One with Bill. I've been heard about one. I want to have a bias about multi-plan, but
sure.
Anyways, you pick the ones you want. And another one with Steve Ballmer, or 2 former CEOs of Microsoft.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I know the one you're referring to, and it's a great one to pick with Bill, because as we all know, Bill has a certain level of intensity, and that's part of his personality and part of his success. And just as you were getting ready to start at Microsoft, we were introducing the first version of Multiplan on the Apple Macintosh, and we were very proud of the fact that we had Microsoft had the first applications on the Macintosh out in the market, and that was a great step forward. And then about a month into it, we realized that there was a problem with Multiplan, a bug. And sometimes you have small bugs, sometimes you have big bugs. When you have a bug that causes your customer to lose their data, that's kind of a big bug.
That's a serious bug, yes.
And so Jeff Harbers, who I dearly loved, he was a great director of engineering, deserves a lot of credit as being the engineer who built Microsoft Office. Jeff and I discussed the situation, figured out that it was really serious and that we needed to go see Bill and talk to him about what we needed to do. And so Jeff and I go to meet with Bill in his office, and Bill sometimes has this thing of rocking and kind of looking down at his feet, which, can be a little disconcerting. And, so we open up the meeting. We say, well, Bill, we found this issue in Multiplan, and Bill doesn't really say very much. And then we say, well, it's a really serious bug, and, we're going to have to do something about it. And Jeff Harbers says, this is what we think we should have done differently in the quality assurance. And Bill doesn't really say anything, and just kind of rocking.
So you got anxious, I guess, right?
Oh yeah, but Jeff and I thought we might get fired. Yeah, and then I explained that we're going to have to recall the product, and it's going to cost several $100,000. And of course, that's a small thing compared to the reputational hit
Yeah.
of having done this, and Bill's rocking, not saying anything, and we don't have anything more to say. So there's
No,
this
that's it.
awkward pause, and then Bill looks up
Hmm.
and he says, "You come in today." So I'm sorry, I lost it. You came in today. It didn't work well. You come in tomorrow, and you do better.
Wow.
You
Wow.
came in today. You lost $250,000. You come in tomorrow. You do better.
You do
And
better.
I,
Wow.
I,
It's
Bill
powerful.
realized that we were doing things that had never been done before.
Yeah.
And so he recognized that in the process of that, we were going to
Yep.
be making, we would make some mistakes. But the
Some
important thing
mistakes.
is whether we learned from our mistakes
Hmm.
and figured out what to do differently.
Yeah.
And the amount of loyalty that Bill engendered
Of
in
course.
me in
That
that
day.
meeting,
Yeah. Yeah.
has stuck with me
Forever.
forever.
Can imagine.
And then with Steve,
Yeah.
Steve, the thing I admire, there are many things I admire about Steve's leadership, but specific examples are just the incredible business discipline, business reviews, which you and I did with him
Oh
together,
yes. Oh
the
yes.
HR and people systems. Those were fundamental assets of Microsoft that I give Steve immense credit for how those aspects of business discipline built the company. And then
Yeah.
of course there was his inspirational leadership. How he would rally the troops and
Wow. Yeah.
inspire us at sales meetings
MGX
and
and others.
it was, I to this day, I mean, both of them are friends, and
Of course.
I just feel so lucky. Jean-Philippe, if we just step back for a moment, I my career has really been about being in the right place
At the
at the
right time.
right time,
Yeah. The right
connected to
people.
great people.
Yes. Yes.
And, I couldn't be more lucky. I'm just a farm kid from Nebraska. And I ended up in the right place at the right time, connected to great people. And I just, I guess you call it, I'm blessed by that.
You're blessed, but you did a wonderful job out of that as well, Jeff. And so, no, thank you so much for sharing those stories, which, of course, talk not just to me, but hopefully to many leaders as well who can be inspired by their managers, hopefully every day. Now, I'd like to transition to your philanthropy journey, Jeff. With your wife, Tricia, we met together a couple of times. I was looking for some of your advice as well early on when I created my own foundation. So you created the Raikes Foundation, I think, back in 2002. And
Correct.
it is deeply rooted in your shared commitment to improving the lives of young people, addressing systemic issues that affect youth and their communities. Recently met in Paris and together, and I was really inspired again by your common vision. Actually, Tricia was talking a lot about the vision and your wonderful contribution and your passion and depth for what is called catalytic philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start where it all began. Who inspired you in the first place to create your own foundation? And where and how did you learn how to become an effective philanthropist? Because that's not an easy job, I found out.
It is. It's not easy work. Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to both of our parents and the values we learned from them. For me, you heard about my parents and paying it forward, giving back to the community. Same thing for Tricia. She grew up in a middle-class family in Seattle, and her mother was involved in every important nonprofit activity in their community, Children's Hospital, and many other things. And so that's kind of where it began with our parents, that sense of we had a responsibility to be good neighbors in the community. And then we get to Microsoft, and Microsoft goes public, and we have all this wealth that we never anticipated. And another influential member was Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett said to Tricia and me, it was around 1991, he said, look, you want your kids to have enough money that they can do anything, but not so much money that they do nothing. And so that puts a lot of pressure on you to really think about, okay, well, what are we going to do with this immense wealth that we've been the beneficiary of, and how do we put it back into society in ways that create opportunities for others? And then one other influence that I should mention, and you participated in as well, is that Microsoft, from its very early days, was very committed to community with the Giving Campaign.
Giving Campaign, yes.
Yeah, and Microsoft, it started with United Way. Bill's mom was a leader of United Way, but then it ultimately evolved into the Giving Campaign. And Tricia and I were very involved in that from our earliest days, again, because of the influence of our parents. And then, of course, when Microsoft, when Tricia left Microsoft, Mary Gates snagged her to get very involved in community and philanthropy. And so Tricia would say Mary was a great influence. And then we, in the early 2000s, we knew we were going to need to start a foundation. We had seen the model of Bill and Melinda. You and I are in business reviews in Paris, and I'm hearing from the subsidiary managers kind of what they're seeing with the dot-com bubble and the dot-com bubble bursting, so on and so forth. And I'm thinking to myself, well, we have a lot of Cisco stock. This is a good time to move that into the foundation.
And you did that.
And I did that. And that was 2002.
Smart move.
So that's kind of how we got started. And so we were really naive at that point in time. But we had the opportunity to see models from people like Bill and Melinda and how Warren thought about philanthropy. And then, of course, working at the Gates Foundation for 6 years, that was like getting a graduate degree in philanthropy.
Yeah, let's get to that, Jeff, in 1 minute, if you don't mind. I want to go back actually to Carol Dweck, because I think you also met with Carol Dweck, right, and Tricia? And I think she inspired you for the foundation as well. It's not just about the business culture or large organization, Microsoft. Actually, it's about the way you can shape a culture of any organization. So could you share more of that and the way you instill that into your early foundation?
Well, it starts with a principle that any philanthropist needs to understand, and that is that philanthropy is a journey. You know, you'll be most effective if you're drawn by your heart. You know, that you have a passion for what you're trying to do, but you also have to pair it with your mind. It's got to be the heart and mind. And we, one of our oldest daughter had kind of a really negative experience with bullying in middle school. And so that got us very curious about bullying in middle school, because we had immense resources, yet we couldn't, be much as effective in helping her as we needed to. So we started there. And then as we got into bullying, we started to learn about adolescent behavior, adolescent brain science. And then that led us at a Stanford Saturday morning hot chocolate with Carol Dweck and her husband, where we learned about non-cognitive behaviors that pair with cognitive behaviors like growth mindset and resilience and, so on and so forth. So that so our education work started with middle school bullying, and then each step of the way continued to transform. And Carol was very influential in helping us understand, these behaviors like growth mindset, fixed mindset. But one of our leaders at the Raikes Foundation pointed out that the psychologists tend to focus in on the individual, but there's also a sociology component, which is the learning environment around the child. You don't want you don't want to vilify the child. You don't want to think the child is broken if they have a fixed mindset. You want to step back and understand the environment that actually shaped those mindsets. And you might have a growth mindset in one subject and a fixed mindset in another, so on and so forth. And so Mary Murphy's work and David Yeager's work, great new book that's just come out, by David Yeager, called 10 to 25, which really gets into the adolescent science that will help all of us as parents, but also I think as managers in companies understand what's going on during that period of development. You know, we like to think of it as the neurobiological deficiency model, where those kids just don't, you know, have the right executive function. But in reality, what's happening is they're seeking respect and trust. And if you learn to speak to them in what they're developing, then you're more effective. So that's an example of us being on the journey.
That's a great example. Any kind of insight you could give to our listeners who are entering or starting philanthropy in what is called and what is practiced as a theory of change, right? Of a foundation or an NGO. Could you share the example of your own foundation? What is the Raikes Foundation theory of change, and what does it look like for the beneficiaries, for the people, the youth you serve?
Yeah, and to provide a little context to your question, I think it's important to understand that there are different models of philanthropy, and they're all good. You know, Warren would say there's retail philanthropy. You know, there's homelessness. Let's have more shelter beds. You know, that's retail philanthropy. And, you know, Bill and Melinda at the Gates Foundation would say, well, actually, you want to step back and understand what's creating that homelessness and figure out how to take on those problems. And that's, you referred to it earlier, catalytic philanthropy. That's a specialty that I learned at the Gates Foundation. You know, you have what the private sector can do and what the public sector can do, but oftentimes there's a gap. And if philanthropy can step into that gap and shape innovative interventions and prove the efficacy of them and how they'll evolve the system, then you have greater long-term potential. So that's what Warren likes. Warren calls that wholesale philanthropy versus retail philanthropy. You know, so for us, where we got started was really the idea that the future of our country and of the world are youth. So what can we do to really make sure that all youth have can reach their potential? And it's kind of like, you know, having a computer on every desk in every home. You know, it's
inclusive as well.
That big vision. And we felt like the greatest areas of impact would be, you know, quality public education, housing stability for young people, because you can't learn if you don't have stable housing.
Of course.
We think inclusion in democratic processes, especially from those who are historically excluded. So this is all part of our vision of building a society where all communities, especially young people, have the opportunity to reach their full potential. And you can only do that if you collaborate, you know, if you have a strong sense of collaboration, because any individual funder is not going to change the world. It's going to be how funders come together and collaborate, how they see the system, evolve the system. And this is part of another initiative for us, is how do you improve the impact of philanthropy?
Yeah, which is a big topic in itself. I'd like to come back to another crucible moment of your life and career, Jeff. I think it's back in 2008. You're running the huge already Microsoft Business Division. I was talking about Office and more. And one day you just decided to make a U-turn, leaving the company, where you could have done even, of course, more. I know that for a fact, to become the CEO of one of the largest foundations in the world, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. I would just recall to a listener, foundation is guided by the belief that all lives have equal value. And they do a wonderful job in many fields, and you'll talk about that. So the same way you talked about this move from a small startup Apple to a small, even smaller software startup Microsoft, less than 1,000 people, 100. You moved to, at the time, 1,000 people less, I think, foundation, right? Bill Melinda Gates Foundation. Tell us more about the way you made that big move and big decision in your mind, and the way you've been able to reinvent yourself, because being one of the key leaders of a huge tech company, Microsoft, globally, and becoming the CEO of philanthropy, one of the largest philanthropies in the world, is like, wow, pretty huge change.
Well, I was in the right place at the right time, connected to the right people.
Yeah.
Actually, it goes back to the principle I mentioned from my father: have a plan, but be open to opportunity. In 2000, the year 2000, I loved my job. It was leading worldwide sales, marketing support, working with you and others. And then Steve says, he wants me to come back to the headquarters and lead the business division.
Yeah.
And I'm not super enthused, but I respected Bill and Steve and what they wanted. And the reason they wanted me to do that is they felt office was dying. They thought office was going to die. And I said, no, it's not. That's crazy. The world of information work is so rich. The total available market is so big. There is so much more that we can do. There's plenty of opportunity for growth. And I told them, I said, look, I think we can grow. I think we can double the office business within 10 years. I am absolutely confident of that. And so I came back, I took the job, I became president of the business division. We got into the business application space, communications apps space, OneNote. We just kept thinking more broadly about the market.
Yeah.
And, it turns out after 7 years, we had doubled the business. So we were 3 years ahead of schedule. And there also, I think, comes a time, and look, a big reason why we were able to do that is because we had a great leadership team. We had people like Rajesh Shah and Chris Capicella and Amy Hood. And, at some point in time, I think a leader needs to step aside and let the next generation of leadership, come to the fore.
Absolutely.
And I knew those. Satya had worked for me for a while, or in my org, but now he was, there were great people. And so I felt like I needed a next chapter. And I went to see Bill, and I had no clear plan, but I said I was interested in teaching business school because I like having dialogue like this, with people like you. I was interested in working with my brother on international agricultural development. The Gates Foundation had an agricultural program at the time. And I said, look, I'm glad to help out on the program pro bono since I know about agriculture and I know about Bill. And then 6 months later, I'm the CEO. It wasn't, there was no plan, but, it turned out when I met with Bill, Patty Stonecipher was retiring, another great Microsoft executive. And so they were going to need a new CEO. And I was just very lucky that I'm the one they chose. And because of Tricia and my commitment to philanthropy and the values that are represented, I thought this would be a great opportunity. The Gates Foundation, just before I had started, was only about 250 people and about $1 billion in annual payout. And by the time I left, it was about 1,300 people and about $4.5 billion in annual payout. And so what I could bring to Bill and Melinda was my understanding of growth from Microsoft's history, how to put in place the systems of strategy review and human resources and, put in place that
systems.
Basically, do that. And in the process, I got to learn an incredible amount of what philanthropy can do well. And I also got to learn some things about where philanthropy didn't do well.
So maybe a follow-up question, Jeff, from a leadership standpoint, because again, I think it's quite unique to have an incredible leader coming from the business world, obviously Microsoft, and getting to the Gates Foundation. What have been, you think, the most critical leadership capabilities you've been developing at the Gates Foundation and learn and added to your leadership tool set?
Well, I would say there's certain things that I bring from my Microsoft career and then Gates Foundation that I bring to the Raikes Foundation. And that is, we do, no surprise to you, Jean-Philippe, we do annual strategy reviews. We think it's important to reflect on what went well in the last year, what didn't go well in the last year, and what do we have to do in the year ahead. And I like to think of it in terms of, temporal, what's the ultimate goal? What do we have to get done in the next 5 years? What do we have to get done in the next year? And we operate on scorecards. No surprise to you. Those are things that we learned
Yeah.
in our Microsoft career. And so, but one thing that I
Mm,
didn't do well, and actually I would say I had to learn this at Microsoft too.
mm,
There are different ways to motivate people.
mm.
The way in which you motivate product people is kind of different than the way in which you motivate and lead sales and marketing people. And
Yeah.
I would say when I first moved to sales and marketing in 1992, I wasn't very good at
Mm,
how to lead and motivate sales and marketing people. I think it took me a year or two to really learn how to
mm.
do that and do that well. And similarly, when you go to the Gates Foundation, I think that experience that I had
Yeah.
from the product division to sales helped me
Mm,
there because
mm.
in both cases, you have people who who benefit and
Yeah.
inspired about being a part of something bigger.
Mm.
But in business, it might be, the bottom line and
Yeah.
winning, in competition,
Sure. Market share.
and
Yeah.
at the Gates Foundation, Raikes Foundation, it's about saving and improving lives.
People
And
lives.
so
Yeah.
you have to understand how to appeal
Mm,
to what is going to best motivate and inspire
mm.
those folks. So, there's certain things you want to maintain, that sense of urgency, even though these
Yeah.
problems are big and are going to take a long time, that sense of discipline about the business.
Discipline. Yeah.
But you also have to understand how to motivate people in different ways.
No, super, Jeff. I would have obviously tons of questions, but I know the time is running pretty fast. So I want to
Okay.
respect your time for the next couple of questions. Obviously, I know for a fact you remain, as myself, deeply passionate about technology innovation. You're also the chair, I think, of the advisory board of AI for SP, Artificial Intelligence for Social Progress, co-founded by Luis Salazar, another Microsoft colleague. And and the goal is to demystify Gen AI for small and mid-sized organizations, academia, nonprofits as well. So it clearly helps to drive positive social change and benefit underserved communities. So how do you envision today, Jeff, the role of Gen AI in enabling your own foundation to achieve youth equity? And do you see it as a potential breakthrough to scale your impact in the US?
Well, you and I both know Luis quite well, and he was
Yeah.
a serial entrepreneur coming out of Microsoft, and his level of energy is for things in technology is amazing. And so, being chair of the advisory board for AI for SP, it's actually artificial intelligence for social progress and economic
Right.
growth.
Yeah.
And that's because he really wants to make sure that we leverage Gen AI for the positive things that it can do in the
Yes.
world. He wants to ethically support economic growth through AI, and at the same time foster connections and augment our voices for greater inclusion, which I think leads to stronger democracy. But when you ask the question of where's Gen AI going to have the greatest
Yeah,
impact for us or others, I want to emphasize we don't know all the answers yet,
for sure. Yeah.
but we do know it has huge potential.
Yeah.
There are rare moments in the technology world where you have these incredible technology paradigm shifts, and you and I experienced the graphic user interface
Yeah.
shift, and then there was the enterprise computing based on microprocessor shift, and then there was the internet cloud, and I put Gen AI right up there with all of
Hmm.
those. Bill would probably say it's even bigger
Yeah.
than all of those. And so, I just think we have to recognize we don't have all the answers, yet at the same time, we can dream big. I'll give you one example that
Yeah.
I think could really impact
Hmm.
education. Saul Khan has created Khan Academy, which is an
Hmm.
incredible resource
Yes.
for people to use online access to improve education.
Hmm.
He's now created Khan Amigo, which is
Hmm.
a Gen AI version of that. And that gives us a glimpse of the future of personalized
Hmm.
tutoring in our education system. But Saul would be the first to say
Yeah.
it's not all about somebody sitting at their computer. It's also about the teacher, the connection with your classmates, so on and so forth. And so I would say Conamigo plus, I'll pick one of our grantees, the Bar
Yep.
Center out of Minnesota.
Yep.
They use relationships and data to improve the educational environment, to really understand each student and what that student needs, and to realign the resources that are available so that you have a personalized culture of support and success for every student. So if you can bring Conamigo together with the principles of the Bar Center, you actually are having a technology paradigm shift in delivering curriculum and a business model transformation in how school buildings operate. And that to me is exciting. I think that's fine. In fact, you and I and others helped build the Center for the Future of Office Work at Microsoft. I've been proposing the idea that maybe we build a model for what the future of education can be in this combination. So to me, I think that is a great example of what's possible, but we don't know all the answers yet.
Fantastic. And I certainly look forward to seeing you, Jeff, achieving that for your foundation soon enough. No, my really last two questions, Jeff. If you are to start all over again as a young Jeff Raikes, okay, in 2024, coming out of Nebraska after college, what would be your deepest aspiration? Would it be launching your own Gen AI startup, bringing your very best to create a philanthropic movement, or take care of the farm in Nebraska? Or maybe something else, another opportunity, as your dad would say.
No, it's a great question to ponder. I think if you kind of forced me to pick, I would say my deepest aspiration would be to harness the power of technology. And that might be in artificial intelligence, but the other area that I'll mention is biomedicine. I think we're, in the same way that you and I saw the PC revolution and the internet revolution, I think we're at the midst and to some extent at the beginning of the biomedicine revolution. And one thing that I learned from my own career is that when you position your career in a growth sector of the economy, it creates more opportunities for you. When you and I joined Microsoft, we had to grow really fast because the company was growing really fast.
Yes.
And so I would want to pick something like that that's really a great, growth area. And it wouldn't necessarily be a startup led by me. I mean, I think actually sometimes working in a growth company in a growth sector is a good way to learn the fundamental skills. And then maybe I'd go on to be the entrepreneur. But I think sometimes this attraction to be the entrepreneur is potentially misplaced. But I think that's probably how I would go about it, because if I could do that well, I could still help oversee our farming operation.
Wonderful. No, my very last question, Jeff. So,
sure.
Because something that I know that our listeners would love to hear from you. What would be your best coaching messages again to this young Jeff or any youth actually to succeed with his or her life?
I'm gonna mention three things. Number one, recognize that core values shape who you are as a leader and impact the culture of your organization. So be very clear and true to your values, and also recognize they are fundamental to your personal brand, who you are. I mean, you and I got to work together. I understand you as a leader because of your values. You understand me as a leader because of my values. Those are our personal brand. The second thing I'll mention is always have a growth mindset. Be intellectually curious. Suspend your fear of judgment. Don't be afraid to take risks. View mistakes, challenges, and failures as learning opportunities. And then the third thing I would say is have a plan, but be open to opportunity.
It's a wonderful closing, Jeff. So, well, Jeff, thank you so much for this amazing, inspiring discussion. I encourage all our listeners to explore the impactful work of the Raikes Foundation, by the way, which focuses on breaking down barriers and building up solutions and by listening to the voices of young people. Be sure to visit their website as well. So to all listeners, thank you so much for being with us today and for your continued support. I'm grateful for more and more of you tuning in to the Positive Leadership Podcast. I look forward to having you join us for our next episode in 2 weeks. Bye-bye. Thanks a ton again, my friend Jeff.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe. You're a great leader, and it's great you're doing this.